can I ask you this? We've been discussing climate change. This, of course, is one area that the government uses to beat us across the head with a big stick about. You know, you must do this, you mustn't do this, you must do this to save the planet. The other area where the government seems to feel it has a right to lord it over us is the the COVID crisis. That they're now saying we may have to have vaccine passports soon, more and more rules and regulations, despite the fact we've hit herd immunity. So what I'm getting at, Peter, is does it alarm you that this government in particular, due to two reasons, possibly the climate change crisis and the virus, is getting more and more illiberal by the day?
Well, this government is the heir of David Cameron's takeover of the Conservative Party in the early years of this century, in which the Conservative Party was basically Blairized. I don't think the people involved, only Cameron himself or George Osborne, actually understood the politics they were pursuing. What they thought was that Blair had been a tremendous success winning elections. They wanted to copy that, and so they would copy Blair's policies. And that's pretty much what they did. What they didn't realize was the origin of Blair's politics, which is basically in the revived European Marxism of the 1960s, known as Eurocommunism, which is what Blairism is, and which has found things of this kind extremely useful. It's basically it's as utopian as Lenin's Bolsheviks, but it's learnt a lot. It no longer believes in violent revolution. It believes in taking over people's minds, taking over the culture, the TV and radio studio, the newspaper, the publisher, the school, and indoctrinating people into believing all kinds of things. And one of its most fantastically powerful tools is to say what we offer is so good that anybody who opposes it is bad. So, for instance, public health is good. Who can argue with that? So anybody who suggests that the measures taken against COVID are excessive or mistaken is not just wrong, but bad and driven to the sidelines. Anybody who suggests that the measures taken to deal with climate change are illogical and don't have a strong scientific or rational basis is, again, bad. And this is the nature of utopian politics. It isolates opponents as bad. It uses the extremely highly advanced skills of advertising and public relations, public relations, by the way, was developed by Sigmund Freud's nephew, a man called Bernays, who knew perfectly well that what it was propaganda, to what he called engineer consent, to persuade people to believe things they hadn't previously believed. It's very, very clever. And I constantly urge people to read a fantastic book published originally in the 50s called The Hidden Persuaders by Vance Packard, which explains these methods and how they're used against us to turn our minds. This has been really directed against us very, very strongly over both these issues. And those who oppose it or even harbour doubts about it or think that the methods being used are wrong are driven to the margins. Now, look at me, I'm a Fleet Street journalist. My knuckles brush the ground. I'm a contemptible person who knows nothing and doesn't understand anything. But I was talking a couple of weeks ago to one of the scientists who opposed the nature of the COVID measures, one of the people who was involved in the Great Barrington Declaration. And she's an extremely nice, and I have to say, very left-wing person who believes strongly in almost Corbynite socialism. And the treatment that she was subjected to of bullying and abuse and marginalization by fellow scientists, people who are supposed to place reason and thought above all things, was horrifying. I mean, it isn't, you can't say it's like a police state because, of course, people don't burst into your house with jackboots and drag you away to a concentration camp. It's much more insidious than that, precisely because it doesn't operate in those ways. But people end up being very bruised by these experiences, and they shut up increasingly as a result, and they are marginalized. Only one view. And watch out for this. When only one view is allowed on any subject, then you know that things are wrong. And I find this increasingly. And this government is safe because it adopted Blairite tactics and because it adopted Blairite politics, even though it's clueless about where they lead. It's just as bad as an actual New Labour government would have been. I find it very disturbing. I don't know where it will end, but it doesn't look good to me.
On that tack, on a more sort of mundane level, what do you think about reports that Labour or the left wing of the Labour Party are trying to rehabilitate Jeremy Corbyn to make him a Labour MP with the whip back in the House of Commons because they feel that Keir Starmer is too centrist, is not left-wing enough. I mean, this party is self-destructing, isn't it?
It's an illustration of how little everybody knows about politics. You have to be an ex-Trotskyist to understand politics, and so few of us are. But most of the ex-Trotskyists in the country were in the top ranks of New Labour, including Blair himself. But nobody even knows that because they don't know. Keir Starmer was himself a former Trot when he was a young man, and not just in his teens either. He was actually a really bizarre and exotic form of Trotskyist called a Pavlovite. I don't think he's actually a lot of his revolutionary thought was devoted particularly to sexual politics and to environmental politics, to the red-green direction. So none of that's changed. Whereas Gerald Jeremy Corbyn, he belongs in a museum. He's a steam-powered Marxist, coal-fired and totally obsolete. And all of the attacks on him were generally made actually from people who were just as left-wing as him, but in a different way. The left hates other people on the left. What the Blairite left hates particularly is people like Jeremy Corbyn who are so obviously left-wing that people can see it. And they love to triangulate themselves against Jeremy Corbyn to make it look as if they're so moderate and responsible. Absolutely not. Blairism wasn't a takeover of the Labour Party by moderates. It was a takeover of the Labour Party by Euro-communist revolutionaries, and that's what it is. And people must understand revolutions no longer involve people in fur hats with rifles with bayonets. They involve slickly suited people who know all about public relations, and that's who's running it. I don't think Corbyn even matters, but the idea that Starmer is to the right of Jeremy Corbyn is a fantasy to anybody who actually understands how politics works.
Do you feel, given the state of the Labour Party, it's obviously very divided, it has a rocky road ahead. People say there may be a day of reckoning coming for Starmer where he'll actually have to grow a pair and kick Corbyn out of the party altogether in order to make his own statement. Given the state of the Labour Party, is there any way they can beat the Tories at the next election?
Well, what they can do, and this is always a possibility, is they can form an electoral alliance with the SNP, and if they do that, then the majority is in their grasp. But since their total collapse in Scotland a few years ago, they have very little chance, and they're almost complete wipeout, I should say, in southern England. I live, as far as I know, in one of the only Labour constituencies in the south of England, outside London. I don't see how it's physically possible, unless some absolute miracle happens, for them to obtain a majority without doing a deal with the SNP. But I don't say if Starmer kicks out Corbyn, it will be triangulation. It will be trying to show that he's something other than what he is by attacking somebody else rather than by demonstrating anything. There wouldn't be, in my view, any significant difference in economic, foreign, or social policy between a Starmer government and a Johnson one. I really don't see how. Look at the complete failure of the opposition to oppose during the COVID panic. They were at one with the government, basically saying, only you should have done it even more what you did already. There isn't any serious division between these two parties, and there hasn't been for some time. It's a fake to believe that there is actually a real opposition or any real adversarial relationship between the two. But Labour's future seems to me to be in considerable doubt. I would be much more worried about what may happen, which is its ultimate replacement by some sort of green Liberal Democrats new body. And look what's happened in Germany, where the Greens have in quite a short time become an enormously powerful force, whereas the old Social Democrats, the equivalent of the Labour Party, shrink by the day. And the old German Conservatives, the Christian Democrats, are also a menace from all kinds of directions by rivals. Don't assume politics will stay as it is, or the Labour Party will continue to exist. I used to think the Tory Party would be the first to collapse, and I worked for that because I thought it would be a very good thing if it did. But I now think it's quite possible the Labour Party will tear itself to pieces. But when it does so, it will be replaced. And I look in the green direction, which will not be any nicer for the nature of that replacement.
Oh no, we don't want that lot. I mean,
Well, that's what you might well get.
Yeah, they've got one MP at the moment, but as you say, there's a threat that that number could go up, and life under the Greens will be there'll be a nightmare. Listen, Peter, we're out of time, but excellent to talk as always. Always enjoy this slot when Mike does it. What a privilege for me to do it. Peter Hitchens there, excellent mail on Sunday. Columnist, I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Talk Radio.